This video was meant to be a little bit different, but the sales didn't go as planned, so I'm gonna revise it a little bit. Not everything that you guys wanted is on sale, but I'm still gonna drop this video and hope that the rest will come around Christmas time. If you're gonna buy anything, feel free to use my link down below. I get a cut and you get a decal, and if they aren't on discount, I recommend not buying it, but if you are gonna do it, at least you get a 3% off. On the right you see a few metrics. We have speed, which is kind of self-explanatory. It's speed on the deck, potentially also at altitude. Maneuverability, we are only looking at nose control, how well it turns, not so much how quickly it runs out of energy. So something like a J35 might be completely filled up in maneuverability, but a prolonged dogfight, when you look at energy, is pretty piss poor. The energy here is the energy bleed, as well as the amount of acceleration that it can have. Countermeasures is the amount of it and just how well they are placed. Radar speaks for itself. Pulse Doppler, no pulse Doppler. Search radar, just a gun sight. System is things like ballistic computers, RWR, and so forth. Air-to-air missiles is, well, the air-to-air missile. Ground ordnance is amount and the effectiveness of the ground ordnance. And endurance is a mix of everything together, kinda. How much fuel does it burn? How much countermeasures does it have? Is it able to stay in the fight for long? And mainly just the overall package of how long can you stay in the fight? The longer that bar is, the more effective you will find yourself in ARB for the most part. But of course, again, it takes a bit of nuance. If you want a slightly more in-depth review, I have a video on all of these planes. Apart from the Mirage F1C as well as the J35XS, they are still all up to date. I will remake the Mirage and the J35 one relatively soon here. But for now, all the other ones are still 100% applicable. But without further ado, let's get right into the aircraft. The A6C Tram is a plane that is carried by its kit. The maneuverability, speed and energy generation all leave a little bit to be desired, and it's definitely not made to fight other fighters. It's made to fly in non-contested airspace, where it can kind of just do its own thing. Contested airspace, it can defend itself, but you do need to sacrifice one of your pylons, of which you don't have that many to begin with. So while the customizable loadout definitely makes it so you can equip it for essentially every mission you want it to fulfill, you do want to be careful that you don't overcommit on one or the other, because it's gonna make your effectiveness drastically lower. It's a decent plane for the BR, and the customizability is definitely nice. However, the airframe, and just together with the fact that you are at the same BR as one of the next planes that I'm going to be covering, I will personally say I would skip this one. It's a consistent grinder, it's very brain dead, because if you like ground attacking, you know exactly what you're getting into, but then you don't really need my opinion on whether you want to fly this thing out or not. If you're an air player, skip this thing. If you are a ground player, you can't really go wrong with it, but I'd still go for the next one. The F5C, on the other hand, is a plane that is much more suited for air-to-air battles. This is a very bare bones plane, and it's carried by its guns as well as the flight performance. It's not particularly fast. It only goes just over Mach 1. But it's carried by the maneuverability. You can dogfight most of your enemies, you just want to be wary of your energy. At high speeds, around Mach 0.95 and up, this thing will hold its energy very well. If you start going below 900 to 850 kilometers an hour, and you are just a little bit too generous with your elevator, you will find yourself an absolute sitting duck very quickly. And even though the plane is very light, the engines just don't have that much power, which is also why I will not advise you to run bombs on this thing in air battles. Because the weight of the bombs will essentially double your total weight, making this thing an absolute shithouse. If you are someone that has somewhat of an experience with War Thunder at all, this thing is a great pickup. It's probably one of the best premiums that you can get right now. However, it will not be completely brain dead until you get somewhat the hang of it. You need to rely on your aim, you need to rely on your plane, and you don't have any technology really to help you out with the rest of it. The FRS is essentially the other side of the coin, apart from the fact that they are both slow as balls. This thing only goes about 13-20 kilometers an hour with the gun pod on, and if you then also strap it full of missiles, it's gonna be even slower and heavier. The Phantoms are just too heavy, and even though this one has the best wing slats out of all of them, the very aggressive ones, it is just not enough simply due to the rest of the airframe. You want to play this thing like a support fighter, you want to stay behind your teammates, or you want to have someone that actually can clear your six in case of an emergency. This thing is a supportive plane, it does have a good kit, and it will be able to slap everything out of the air that's in front of it. The issue is if they do get past the head-on, you're basically dead unless it's another Phantom. Is it a good pickup? It's okay, it's definitely good for kind of dipping your toes in the top tier experience. but I do think that the F5C overall is simply more competitive. And then we have one of the most well-rounded planes in the entire bracket. It is fast, it is maneuverable with the wings swept out, and because of the absolute massive engine, together with the fact that it doesn't really bleed much speed once the wings start sweeping out, this thing is overall in the flight performance department one of the best planes at 11.3. And because of this, it's a lot less susceptible to something like up tiers. The flight performance is not gonna win you anything against a MiG-29 or an F-16. But if the enemy pilot does make some mistakes, you might actually be able to get away with it, opposed to something like the Phantoms. The missiles are a bit of a mixed bag. The R-24s are some of the best missiles in the slot at this battle rating. However, the R-60Ms, they're okay, they're decent, but they're nothing to write home about. Overall, a very well-rounded package, as long as you want to shoot at other things that fly. The second you start looking at air to ground, this thing is very pitiful. And this thing really has no place in your hangar, but that's just how it is with these air superiority fighters. It's a very focused plane, it does get a little bit to get used to, but once you get this thing down, it basically flies itself and you will be able to take the fight to most of the things you start running into. Then we have the Russian A6E Tram, the Su-39. The Su-39 is again not carried by its flight performance. The flight performance is very bad for 11.3. And it's carried by its equipment. It has a lot of countermeasures. It has IRCM on the back of the plane, which makes basically IR heat seekers just go completely apeshit, making it very hard for them to track your plane. It has all the computers that you need. It has fantastic RWR. But at the end of the day, it's the same deal as with the Tram. It's a ground attacker. You need some help to keep the skies clear, and you need some help to keep your ass clear. Luckily, with the Frogfoot, you do not actually need to sacrifice anything to be able to defend yourself. You have an internal gun, and you can carry 2 R-73s together with 2 R-60Ms, which are plentiful for self-defense. However, if you are trying to fight F4Js and MiG-29s, for example, you're not gonna have the best time if they actually have a flare key. Overall, do I think this thing is worth your money? I definitely don't think so, but if you are looking for a high-tier ground attacker that can simultaneously grind the rest of the air tree, I guess you can pick it up, but don't say I didn't warn you. Then we have the MiG-21bis, and the MiG-21bis is more of a poke fighter. It loses its speed quite quickly. It is, however, very maneuverable, and it has a very good engine to compensate for the speed bleed. The flight performance is quite okay, however the kit of this thing isn't that fantastic. The countermeasures are okay. Radar is basically only a search radar, so I turn it off to not warn enemy players. But overall, you want to stay hidden with this thing and shoot IR missiles from people that aren't paying attention to you. The R60s and the R13Ms that I'm running are relatively easy to flare, so you're best off fighting people that aren't paying attention to you, or you want to take smaller fights in something like a 1v1 where this plane excels opposed to the bigger team fights. It can boom and zoom, it can hit and run. However, you do want to be careful, as this thing isn't that fast to get away from people. It rips at 1365, but because this thing is not actually engine limited and it is airframe limited, if you start getting a little bit of altitude with this thing, you will find yourself actually going hella quick. And that's also why the speed metric on the top right there is so damn high. On the deck it's not that fast. The higher you go, the faster it will become relatively to your enemies, but sitting at altitude is most of the time not the best of ideas when it comes to flying at 12.0. So in short, it's good at small fights and 1v1s, it's good at ambushing people, and it's absolutely terrible when it comes to air to ground. Is it worth your money? Yes and no, there are better planes to pick up, but if you really want to grind the German nation, it is relatively consistent and it will net you a lot of RP. Just don't expect it to be the best plane at the battle rating. And then we have the F4 junk, and it's called that for a reason. It's essentially just a worse F4S. It doesn't get HMD, it doesn't get AIM-7F, and neither does it get the improved wing slat. And even though the British normally get improved engines, this is an F4J. It gets the same engines as the F4J does in the American tech tree, which are simply not good enough. It is slightly faster than the F4S, even with the gun pod on, but it's not gonna be fast enough, and it will barely outrun something like the MiG-21bis. If you strip the gun pod, it will go pretty fast, it will go about 14-20, but again, you don't have a gun, and you are then reliant on your missiles. It has AIM-9Gs, it has AIM-7E2s, and they are okay together with the Pulse Doppler radar, but this plane is more helpless than the F4S was that I mentioned at the start. The missiles are worse, the airframe is worse, and it just doesn't have the kit to really compete. It can bring bombs, reasonably effective. It doesn't really hinder you too much as long as you don't take too many. You drop them on one base and you keep flying. This goes for all the Phantoms, but overall the F4J is just not worth it. You might be hoping that they are getting something in the future, because right now there is just nothing to grind either at rank 7 and 8. And if you are hoping for that, you might as well also hope that they add a better premium. This thing right now is one of the planes that I would recommend strongly against picking up, and it's not because it's British. Then we have the F4EJ, which is essentially even worse. If we compare them with both the guns equipped, the F4EJ is faster and slightly more maneuverable because it doesn't have to lug the gun pod around. But that's essentially where the advantages stop. It has a worse radar, it doesn't have pulse Doppler, it has worse sparrows, they are not even E2s, it doesn't have AIM-9Gs, it gets AIM-9Ps instead, which are essentially AIM-9Js. It also doesn't get Mavericks, and it also just doesn't get laser guided bombs. This thing is a straight downgrade, and despite all of this, I would still pick this thing over the F4J UK. Why? Because it's a lower BR, it has more favorable matchmaker, and there is actually something to get right now in terms of one of the best F-16s in the game, the F-16AJ. We might also get some future additions, which would be nice, something like the F2 or maybe the F-15, but again, if we are waiting for something to be added, we might as well also wait for a premium to be added. Overall, it's really only worth it if you want to bypass the high tier grind of Japan, which is among some of the worst that you will find in the game. But other than that, just skip this thing, wait for something to be added when the actual good planes are added as well to the Japanese nation. And then we have the 10.3 MiG-21MF at 11.0 because it has slightly better missiles. The J7D is another interceptor just like the MiG-21bis. However, the J7D does not have the engine to compensate for its massive flaws. It is slower, it has less maneuverability because it doesn't have the power to keep going. The energy is much worse. You will find yourself out of speed in 1 or 2 turns and you will not be getting it back very quickly. The radar is still ass, the systems are still not very great, the RWR is hardly useful, the air-to-air missiles are decent, the PL5s are better than R60Ms. However, you only get 4 of them and they can only be fired from rear aspect. You then also have the PL7s, which are pretty okay. They are just Magic 1 copy paste, but overall you are better off with the PL5s. If you want to carry one Magic, you can do so. It's what I personally do, but overall this plane is not very great. However, the Chinese tech tree does have some decent things to grind. It does have some unique planes like the J7E for example. But if you are looking for straight performance in air battles, this thing is not gonna be your friend. The air-to-ground ordnance is also just not there because, well, it's an interceptor and you fly it essentially the same way as the MiG-21bis. However, you need to be even more careful and you basically need to just rely on people not paying attention to you so you can sling your missiles off in peace. Then we have the opposite of the J7D, the F104S TAF. It's one of the fastest planes on the deck to this day. The engine is absolutely massive and it will accelerate you through basically anything you need, but it also has very little maneuverability. It does roll very well, it can use its flaps at very high speed, but it's the heaviest F104 and you will definitely feel it. The radar is okay, it doesn't have a pulse Doppler mode and you cannot carry radar missiles together with a gun. So I will be running this thing with exclusively only IR missiles. This thing is a hit and run fighter, you will be able to outrun basically anything, and because it's so fast you can defend yourself against missiles for the most part without even having to drop countermeasures. The half afterburner trick with this thing works exceptionally well because it will still go pretty damn quick, and this makes it so you can stay in the fight pretty long. You just want to be ambushing people and surprise them by how fast you can close the gap. The F104S is also good at grinding an RRB because you can actually strap 1 or 2 bombs on it and just fly over a base. You are fast enough to just drop it and then you can keep on going and play the rest of the match out like a fighter, basically ensuring you some RP at the start of every match. Is it worth the pickup? The Italian nation isn't that fantastic to grind, but if there are planes that you want to fly out over there, you can definitely do so. However, the F104S is gonna be a bit of a boring plane to fly because all you really do is just fly straight. The J35XS is a bit of a weird one. It's essentially a pay-to-win J35D because it gets more missiles and more flares. You do lose one gun however, and it's very awkward to use. Also because you just don't have any tracers. The speed is good, the acceleration is quite okay. The maneuverability is a bit of a weird one. At medium speed it pulls hella AOA. It turns quite nicely. At super low speed you turn into a brick because you're not able to get your energy up. And at super high speed, well, you just lock up and you end up flying straight. So the maneuverability bar that is completely filled out, take it with a grain of salt, because it's not completely accurate and it doesn't portray the entire story of it. It can be maneuverable at the right speeds, however you will not find yourself at those speeds very long. You only have 12 countermeasures, they pop at 2 at once. You don't have pulse Doppler, it's a pretty bare bones radar, but you also don't have radar missiles, so you won't really need it. You don't have RWR, so going to altitude is an absolute death sentence. And because the low amount of flares and the fact that you bleed speed so damn quickly, it's just not very great when it comes to the team fight. You don't have a lot of battle presence at the start. When the game kind of goes in the late stages and it's like 1v1, 2v2, the plane kind of comes alive. But unfortunately nowadays, Era B is about the start of the game, where your real saving grace is hoping that people don't really pay attention to you, but you can't really ambush from on top because you just don't know when radar missiles are coming in. So overall it's a bit of a weird plane. It's okay for grinding, it's not completely terrible, however it's just not very effective and it's very much match dependent how well this thing is gonna be doing. It either does fantastically or you get absolutely nothing done. Then we have the Mirage F1C-200. When it comes to the French tech tree, it's probably the best thing to pick up. However, the flight performance is rather average. It is decently fast, it's slightly more maneuverable than something like a Phantom, and it does hold its energy quite well at high speed, so much so that you will find yourself constantly passing out. It has an absolute metric load of countermeasures. The radar is pretty good, you do have a good pulse Doppler mode. However, the missiles that you need to slave to this mode just aren't it. The real thing here is that you only have 2 Magic 2s, which are absolutely fantastic. And then you have the 530 Supers, which just get dodged by people that aren't even trying. The R530E is also an option that you can carry on the middle pylon. It's a bit of a gimmick missile, it's not particularly great. And then together with the fact that you only have 2 DEFAs, just make this thing not that effective overall. The Magic 2s are fantastic and you will find a very consistent amount of RP through them. But when you look at the rest of this plane, it is just kind of mid. The performance isn't there. The only thing you rely on is your 2 absolutely bullshit missiles. Other than that, it is pretty decent in terms of a ground attacker as well. It can just kind of do whatever you want it to do. Just don't expect the flight performance to really rinse anyone. It did get buffed a while ago and the plane definitely feels a lot better than it did in my old video. However, the F1C is just not a plane that is that fantastic if you want to look at performance alone. Decent grinder, not the best plane. Then we have the Kfir Canard, another great addition to the premium lineup. The Kfir Canard is extremely fast, it has a good acceleration and the maneuverability is quite okay. Do be careful of the speed bleed because it's still a delta wing plane. However, just like with the MiG-21bis or maybe even more like the F104S in this case, this thing just accelerates up to its speed very quickly again. Just like with the MiG-21bis, if you put this thing in a slight climb or use it at medium altitude, this thing is absolutely rapid. And then also because you can actually carry bombs while you are carrying your missiles, you can use this the same way as with the F104S, where you drop some bombs on the opening stages of the game and then you can just go fighter mode. There is no need to go RTB to get more bombs. You can simply just equip the bombs, drop them on the base and then just keep doing what you were doing like you would if you were simply a fighter. This doesn't really hinder your performance or your positioning at the start, so I highly recommend you to do it. Other than that, it only has 2 missiles and the guns aren't that fantastic, so when it comes to being super effective at the start of the game, you basically have the same problem as you have with something like the J35. However, this thing does have more speed, more acceleration and a lot more flare, so it is a little bit better in getting around the map, but again, this thing really prefers the smaller fights or potentially the 1v1s. And that's all of them. Feel free to check out all the videos that I made on the ones that are still up to date. I will put them all in the description. If you want to be notified when the J35 or the Mirage F1C video goes live, feel free to drop a sub. And if you are buying anything, don't forget to treat yourself with a bit of a decal and potentially a discount. Thank you all for watching and you will see me all again in the next one.